All right, welcome folks. My name is Kevin, and I want to thank you guys all for joining us in our latest Best of the Best webinar series. For webinar episode 54, we are excited to not only talk about the iRender nXt plugin for SketchUp, but to have the president of Render Plus Systems, Hart, on air to discuss iRender's unique features. Hart, our presenter, and Rich Hart, who will be answering questions in the chat room, have been developing and working with CAD and rendering systems for 25 years. They created the first microprocessor-based CAD system, ARRIS, which is still being used today. About 20 years ago, they wrote the first rendering package, which was called Render Plus, back when monitors only had 256 colors. It was a real challenge to define the colors in dither colors, to make good renderings with just 256 colors. Since then, they have worked with other rendering packages such as RenderMan from Pixar, Lightscape, Lightworks, Accurender, and now the new Accurender nXt engine, which is used in iRender nXt. They have integrated the nXt engine into SketchUp and will be giving you some pointers on how to use it today. In addition to running things at Render Plus, Al is a longtime advocate and ongoing contributor to the SketchUp design community. The presentation itself will be about 40 minutes, and in just a bit I will hand over the podium to Al Hart. If you have any questions at all during the presentation, please post them into the question box and the chat window to be answered by Rich Hart from Render Plus. He'll be on hand as a panelist to answer any and all iRender related questions. As a heads up, if you're going to be leaving early, we are recording this webinar live, so if you're going to miss this now, we will have this webinar posted for free as always on our Novedge Webinar series channel through Vimeo and YouTube. With that said, I will now turn it over to Al Hart. Al, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I will change the presenter to you right now. There you go.
Okay, there we go. So I'm going to be showing you a little bit about iRender Next, an add-on rendering package for SketchUp. I hope most of you are SketchUp users. This will make the most sense. Otherwise, it makes sense to try to look at SketchUp for modeling and iRender Next for rendering. SketchUp is very good for making 3D models and visualizing them, but adding a photorealistic rendering package to SketchUp will really make your rendering stand out. And an integrated rendering package like iRender Next is best because it stores all your rendering settings right inside of SketchUp. So if you change your model and re-render them, you're all ready to go. I want to say something about ease of use. I'm going to start out by showing you how easy it is to create some good renderings, and then I'm going to show you some additional features you can use. But each special effect, such as fuzzy reflections, refined transparency, etc., is one more setting you need to make. So although good renderings are easy to make, even better renderings will require a little more time to set up. So I hope I'm able to show you both how easy it is to get started and how easy it is to improve your renderings. I'm going to start out with a model here I downloaded from the 3D warehouse just to show you kind of what happens when you basically render a model. Up at the top of my screen is a toolbar here. This is the iRender Next toolbar you get when you install iRender Next. It has a number of functions on it, some of which we'll use today. We're really not going to learn everything in an hour, but I'm going to give you an introduction to quite a few things. And I'm going to start out by just saying render this model. This brings up a dialog we're going to see lots of times today. It comes up every time you render unless you uncheck it to not show it anymore. But it's really handy for new users to just kind of get started and see what you're doing. What we've done across the top is created 5 lighting presets where you can kind of tell us how you want the rendering to work. It used to be you had to set up sun and sky and all these things, but by picking one of the presets, you'll just be ready to go. We're going to try this first preset first. It's called Exterior. It turns on the SketchUp sun and sky. And these other settings, we'll look at some of these later, but I'm making a 600 pixel resolution rendering. I'm going to tell it to render for about 20 passes. Let's give it a shot and let it go. The first thing we do is we have to read through the SketchUp model and extract the model. This only took about 10 seconds for this model, but it can take several minutes for much more complex models. I'm going to move this rendering picture down to the lower right. So we'll kind of always have the SketchUp model on the left and the rendering picture on the right. It's rendered the model. There's not much about this first rendering that's better than SketchUp, It's also rendering it for multiple passes. I told it to stop at the end of 20 passes here so we can look at some things. We get a pretty good rendering in usually about 20 passes, and some of our people let it render for hundreds or thousands of passes, even rendering overnight. For this very first rendering, I'm going to show one of our features that we'll see a lot today, which is lighting channels. I'm going to click on this yellow light bulb here. It brings up a list of the lights that are in this model. And I'm just going to turn off the sun for a second. There's some interior, well, I'm going to turn off the sun, and you'll see the big shadows of the sun simply disappear. I'm going to turn it back on, and now I'm going to lower the intensity of the sun to 0 and then raise it up very slowly. So 1 is kind of the default, but if I put the sun at 1/10, you get very light shadows because the sun is not shining where the shadows is, but the sky is illuminating that area. I'll just run this up a couple of more numbers, and you'll see it go 0.1, 0.2. As you go higher and higher, the shadows get darker and darker. And if I turn off the sky entirely, then the sky, of course, disappears, and the shadows get very dark. This is just a nice feature because you can do it after you render and adjust the lighting just how you want. With many renderers, you'd have to go back to the render, change the sun intensity, and start rendering all over again. Now let's take a look at some of the other lighting presets. That was exterior. We have one called High Dynamic. It basically lights the whole scene as if there was light filtering through a forest. And it's useful. We're so used to in SketchUp, since the only shadows we get are from the sun, we're so used to seeing the sun all the time. But many times a more subtle lighting will be more appropriate, especially if you're doing model race cars. But even for a lot of exterior scenes, High Dynamic is a good choice. So I'm going to check High Dynamic. That turns the sun and the sky off, and then let it render it again. Now you'll see more of the effect of the rendering passes because there are shadows here because it's grabbing random points in the sky for each pass. So there's still a sense of shadows, but there are more shadows caused just not by the sun directly, but just from the overall effect of the sky. So there we go. And now I'm going to try another one. And this next one is called an HDRI sky. I need to explain that a little more. These are images people have created. They're full panoramic images. And instead of just being red, blue, green, and colors we're used to like black and white, they also store the intensity from the various places in the image. So for instance, you could have a picture that had a sun which was white and had a cloud which was white, and they could both be the same shade of white, but the HDRI image would know that the sun was much brighter, so it would create shadows from the sun, even though they were both the same shade of white. We have a tab on our setup tab, our setup option dialog here called HDRI, which has a number of additional HDRI images you can choose, and also has a button here I'm going to push over on the right, which shows us the current image. The image is a full 360-degree panorama. We're only looking at part of it. I'm going to slide this slider right now. Right now it's at 180 degrees. I'm going to slide it to the left a little bit, and you see a different part of the image. And you won't see this right away on Webinar because Webinar isn't as fast as on your real machine, so it'll jump for you a little bit. But you can see that the image they have here, the guy took from the top of a mountain, and it simply includes all 360 degrees. I'm going to slide around here and find, here's one with just lots of nice clouds. So by stopping there, that will be the image that it puts behind my model. It uses the rest of the image for lighting. There'll be a little reflection in the windows of it, but if there was much more window reflection, then the part of the original image that's behind the windows would just show up. So now I'm going to go ahead back with this HDRI sky prefix and re-render the model. And it places that HDRI sky behind the model. I can't see very much reflection in these windows, but if we had a model with more windows, especially windows up higher, we'd see the reflection of the sky in the windows as well. Now I want to show the other two lighting presets, but they make more sense in the interior of the model. So let's go back to the model here, switch over to the interior. I have placed a couple of lights in here already, and I'm going to grab the rendering preset interior with no sun. And that's just going to turn off the sun, turn off the sky, and render the model with just the lights that are in here already. There's a couple of ceiling lights up there. I see a floor lamp, and we should see the effect of that. See, the floor lamp has light above, over on the right has light above and below the lamp, and the shadows down below show the effects of the various lights. And these lights are also bouncing off all the walls. And as we have more passes, we're about 10 passes right now. As we have more passes, the shadows are just getting more and more subtle. But with no sun in the sky, I can't see anything outside the windows. I'm going to stop this and pick the interior with sun option. This turns the sun and the sky on. It makes some other settings. The settings at the bottom of this dialog show mostly what the 5 presets do. You really don't have to worry about them on this dialog. They're all available on all the other dialogs. But right now you see here the sun and the sky are on. But if I click interior no sun, the sun and the sky go off. I'm going to click it back and the sun and the sky turn on. Then I'm going to start the rendering again. And we'll see that same model. And now we don't really see the sky outside the windows because we're seeing the ground because of the angle we're looking at. But you can see the sunlight coming in from the windows on the left and shining on the floor. And also the farthest window on the left, you can see a lot of light, or that light may be coming in the back windows. There's light from the sun and light from the sky balancing the whole model. This would be a good time to stop and look at lighting channels again, because the lighting channels will again let us change these things. For instance, if I wanted to have the sun and the sky dimmer, I could set them both down. Right now they're both 1. I'm going to run them both down to 0.5. That'll make the effect of the outside lights smaller. And maybe this light on the right, which is in the set of other lights, you can't have a lighting channel for every light. You're only allowed 8 of them. But usually by doing some work, putting all the ceiling lights in one channel, putting all the interior lights in another channel, you can do some good stuff. I'm going to turn off that light on the right, the floor lamp. You see how it just turned off. I'm going to turn it back on and raise it up to make it brighter because I wanted to have more of an intense effect from that lamp. So these lighting channels will become very handy when you want to just quickly finish up your image when you get near the end. Okay, now we want to do some work on reflections. Really, lighting and reflections and transparency are the 3 fundamental things you want to be working with in your renderer. We're going to see a lot of other interesting features as we go too. But I'm going to go in here and make the teapot reflective. So I can just click on the teapot. It brings up a dialog showing what the current settings are for the teapot. And the first ones we want to start with are just some defaults. So I'm going to tell it to make the teapot metal. So these are defaults that set the reflection to make things look like certain things. I'm going to just tell it to make the teapot metallic. I'm also going to tell it to make the floor. So I'm right-clicking on the floor, or I'm clicking on the floor, picking it up, and I'm going to choose a default there called reflective. So that'll make the teapot metallic, make the floor reflective. Tabletops are usually reflective too, so I'm going to do the same thing. Click on the tabletop, make the tabletop reflective. Okay, and then I'm going to render this. I'm going to click the render button again. It's going to remember our last default we had from before, and you should see some effect of the reflections here. You can definitely see not only the sunlight shining directly on the floor, but the reflection of the windows on the back wall on the floor. On the teapot itself, you can see reflections of all the various windows, and we can see reflection on the wood. When you make your first renderings, a little reflection goes a long way. I loved it, but I'm a computer programmer and really not an architect, so I tend to make everything perhaps too reflective, where you want to create kind of a photorealistic look, just something that brings special things to your model that aren't available there in SketchUp. I'm going to show you some of the other things reflective. I'm going to bring up a little image of just a teapot. we reflected. These show some of the default settings. The reflective setting just makes it reflective, and there's two main settings on each of these reflections. Reflection itself, reflectivity, which on this upper left image is set to 0.60, and sharpness, which is set to 90. So you'll see that the reflections are just a little fuzzy. On the one on the right, I put it on metal and I set it to be glossy. Glossy tends to make you can almost see nothing directly reflected, but the lights shine up there. More like I'm sitting in front of a telephone right now and I see my telephone handle looks very glossy. The teapot we did do before, I made metallic. The metallic down here in the lower left has a reflectivity of 0.90, almost perfectly reflective. 1.00 would be a true mirror. The reflection is a little more realistic if it's not 100% reflective. And it's metallic. I'm going to talk about what metallic does there in a minute. And this last one uses our plastic default reflection. It has a low reflectivity and a low sharpness, which just makes it more of a plastic effect. And so you can see that by just playing with a couple of things here, you can really get some good reflective effects. I want to show you a little bit more about metallic because it took me a long time to understand it. When we non-metallic reflection usually reflects things in the color of the object itself. So in our teapot a second ago, I'm going to bring that back up. No, anyway, in our teapot a second ago, the reflections were all in the color of the teapot. With metallic reflection, the reflection tends to be in the color of the object itself. So in this upper left image, we have a yellow teapot, and it gets tricky here, but the reflections are all in yellow, and that means that the blue square on the left, which is being reflected, is really reflected only in black, because blue isn't contained in yellow, so none of the blue really comes through. But hopefully you can see the difference here in that the reflections themselves look very different because of the color of the teapot. With ordinary reflection, like in a mirror, the reflection has nothing to do with the color of the mirror if you don't sell it to metallic. There's another example down below here where we have a blue, both of these spheres are actually the same color. The one on the left was set to do metallic reflection, which brings the blue color of the sphere into the reflection. The one on the right, even though the sphere was blue, since it wasn't metallic reflection, it reflects things in the more like a mirror in the sense of the actual object. Now we want to move on to another SketchUp model and talk a little bit about transparency. This is again, a couple of objects I just downloaded from the 3D warehouse. One is a glass table, and the other is a wine glass, which is sitting on the table. I put a tile floor under here because we really want to show you the effect of what happens when you render things. There's a number of settings you can put on transparency, and since we don't know when you start how you made your objects, we just treat everything as a thin piece of glass. So when I render this, let's try interior no sun. When I render this, it's pretty much not going to look very impressive at all because we didn't tell it anything about the glass surfaces. So you can see that they're transparent. You can see through them. They both make a transparent shadow, which is something that SketchUp's not capable of doing. It either makes a shadow or it doesn't. So there's a light shadow from the table and a darker shadow from the wine glass, and an even darker shadow where both of them are in effect. So the first important setting you need to set for good transparency is whether the item is thick or not. Here's our transparency setup. This has a 94% transparency. It's mostly transparent. Index of refraction, which we'll see in a minute, and it does not have thick checked. If you make something out of a single face, we consider that thin glass, and that's pretty much our default for SketchUp. We figure people just put a piece of glass in there. But if you put your glass in with a solid, then you want to mark it as thick, because then the renderer knows to treat everything between the two panes of glass as also being made out of glass. So I'm going to set this wine glass to thick. I'm going to set the table to thick and then re-render the model, and you'll see a pretty vast difference here. Now it looks like a thick tabletop, and around the edges of the tabletop you'll see that the I'm trying to get rid of all those things. You'll see that the area behind it is actually distorted. I'm looking for a good place to see an example of that, probably here below the wine glass. But the thick glass distorts things, so when you set up the glass to be thick, it does distort it. Still, the shadows here aren't very impressive because the light tends to go right through the glass. We have another setting for that called caustic. Caustic refers to the special kind of reflection. When you go out to dinner tonight, look at the shadow of your wine glass, and you'll see that it's got very interesting things going on in the shadow that you wouldn't have expected if you didn't stare at it before. I'm going to make both the tabletop and the wine glass caustic and then re-render it again. The big change here will be some change around the edge of things because caustics has to do with how things reflect other light, and some changes in the shadows. So let's start that rendering. So you see some very interesting effects. We have a single spotlight shining on this table, and the caustic effects create this shadow. You usually won't turn these on, mostly when you're including a wine glass on purpose. It's not really worth turning caustics on for every transparent surface you have. I have a little image here just to review some of the transparency settings. So here's a SketchUp model with a transparent wine glass. First, we have just a default rendering of the wine glass, which treats it as thin. And I have, again, a spotlight shining on it, which isn't very impressive. Then when I turn on thick, now it really starts to look like a real piece of glass because it's taking into account the reflection of the glass, the reflection of the light through the glass and around the glass. And then when I turn on caustic, I get a sense of nice shadows. So there's an index of refraction on all these transparencies. For everything we've been doing here, it's just set to 1.50, which is pretty good for this type of glass. If you know exactly what glass you're working with, you can go on the internet or in your architectural manuals and find the actual index of refraction and set the index of refraction to be just like the proper material, and we'll do a pretty good job of emulating that material for you. Now let's go back to our SketchUp model. And I want to show you how to add some lights to the model. Here I have a room which has no lights in it yet. If I were to render it, it would pretty much render black, but that's not true. We notice when you have no lights at all, and then we put a little headlight on your camera like they used to have in the first movie cameras I bought with a little headlight right on there. It doesn't make a very good rendering, but at least you're not sitting and looking something black. Lights can be both simple and very complex depending on how you approach them. And there's several ways to make lights with iRender Next. The first one is just to go into our lamp wizard, which we'll look at first. We have some ceiling lights, which you can just use out of the lamp wizard, and they work pretty well. A lot of people, when they first get started, they want to model a ceiling light. They put light bulbs in there. They put reflectors behind it. They put the panel below it. I can't remember the name right now. And try to emulate that light. But they're doing a lot of work. It works pretty well just to put a nice rectangular square there and call that a ceiling light. So you can place things like ceiling lights directly with the lamp wizard. You can place spotlights or light bulbs using the lamp wizard. And we also have a little tool that makes floor lamps and table lamps. Sometimes there's other things, though, where you have something specific and you just want to make it into a lamp. If you have one of those new swirly light bulbs that they sell in the grocery stores now, you might want to go in there and model that whole light source itself and make that a light. And so we have two ways to make existing objects into lights. One is to set object properties and tell it that this object is a light. And the other one is to take a surface and tell us that that surface is in a light. So if all your lights had a white material called light, you could go in and make that material a light, and then everything that contained that light would know that it was illuminating. And then in addition, we've put a bunch of other lamps up on the 3D warehouse already that already have lights in them. So sometimes it's worth, if you go into the 3D warehouse and search for iRender Ready, you'll just find our lights, and you can place those in your model and use them. Let's go back to that model again. So I'm going to bring up the lamp wizard, which is up here on our icon menu. It's right here, a picture of a little lamp with a thing that says it's going to load a dialog. And first I'm going to pick some ceiling lights. We have some rectangular and some round ceiling lights. I'm going to pick a round ceiling light. You can give each light a size. This one's going to be a 2-foot circle. You can set the wattage. I'm going to make them all 75 watts, and you can set the color. So I say create lamp. I place a ceiling lamp here. I'm going to place a ceiling lamp here. I'm going to place 4 ceiling lamps, and then render the model with just those 4 ceiling lamps. And you notice the shadows from those ceiling lamps and the shadows bouncing off the walls. Ceiling lights, sometimes you're trying to represent what something looks like exactly, then you need to put in exactly the right lights. Sometimes you're just trying to create a model for someone and show them how it's going to look. Ceiling lights are a good way to get some good indirect lighting on that model. Now I'm going to return to this thing. I'm going to put in a spotlight. Ordinarily, a spotlight would go somewhere else, but I'm just going to create one for you to show you what it looks like. Let's put a spotlight on the ceiling shining on the back wall. So I say create my spotlight. I put it on the ceiling. You see that big blue area? That's a thing so I can kind of see what direction the spotlight's pointing. It doesn't actually render. The spotlight is the little white piece at the top, and the big blue area helps me know where it's going to go. I'm going to select the spotlight, right-click on it, and pick a function called Aim Lamp. There's a number of iRender Next functions here when you right-click on things. Aim Lamp just makes it really easy to aim the lamp at something. So we're going to aim that spotlight right at the back wall. And then render the model again. Again, ordinarily you don't put a spotlight right in the middle of the drawing unless there was one there. There is an ability to put a spotlight somewhere and then hide the spotlight. So you won't see the spotlight, you'll only see the light from it. I really can't see the effect of the light as spotlight. I'm going to turn off the ceiling lights using the light wizard and hope that fixes it. Yeah, now you can see much more of the effect. And I didn't make this a tight spotlight. There are a bunch of settings in there for beam width and such, but you can see how you can use a spotlight. So this might be a case where maybe I wanted to really highlight this back wall. I might have put this spotlight in and then told it to hide the spotlight from the rendering itself. Now let's go in and put in some of these floor lamps. We could do a lot more with the floor lamps and the table lamps. What we've done is given you a set of 3 shades and a set of 3 bases. We encourage, the reason we haven't done more is no one has gone on our forum and said, oh, this would be nice if you added 1 or 2 more shades. We really respond to things on the forum. Rich and I just regularly go in there, see what people want, and usually in a week or 2 they have exactly what they want to have. And sometimes it's interesting that no one has ever responded to this menu and said, what a good idea, why don't you improve it? You can go up here and pick 1 of 3 lamp shades, you can pick the kind of base you want, you can pick the height of the lamp. This model happens to be kind of tall, so I'm going to make a 7-foot lamp. You can pick the shade, the color, the intensity, and then when you're all ready, create that floor lamp. It turns out people don't use floor lamps much anymore. But if you need a floor lamp, and it doesn't have to be exactly the right floor lamp, this is a good way to get one. I'm going to go in and make a table lamp as well. I like this shade here because the light comes directly through the shade. And right now, I made one of these before. Well, I'll make one here so you can see how bad it looks. These settings aren't very good, so it's creating a really ugly lamp because the shade's way too big. Or maybe that's just the lamp you like. I'm going to just change it and change the height of the shade to be only 1'6", create the lamp again, and that's pretty much a better lamp. Let's just render this again so you can see how this is going. So I have my table lamp with the light shining through the shade. It makes a circle on the bottom because that's where most of the light goes. I have my floor lamp. The spotlight's still up there. We're starting to get a real sense of nice lighting in this model. Next, I want to show how to make lights out of objects that are already lights. So I have grabbed two things in the warehouse, a couple of sconces over here on the left and a wall light, that I want to make those lights. It turns out that these sconces, let me zoom in on them a bit, they have a transparent piece and they don't have any light bulb in them. When things are like that, the easiest way to make them a light is just to put a light bulb in. So I'm going to zoom around so I can see inside the sconce, load our lamp wizard again, tell it I want a point light, which is just a little round light. I'm going to make it about 2 inches big. Just place it and place it, whoops, made myself a note not to make that mistake. I want to place it in the component because by placing it in the component, it will automatically get placed in both of them. So I need to click on this component and go in and say I want to edit it. Now I'm inside the component. I'm going to just go back, load the lamp wizard again, still got the same lamp settings, and place it inside there. I think I must have made it 2 feet big instead of 2 inches big, so bear with me, we all make mistakes. Let's change that to 2 inches instead of 2 feet. Create the lamp. Now it's going to make much more sense to place that lamp inside there. And then exit the thing, go back to the sconces, and you'll see that there's a light bulb now in both sconces. Again, the easiest way very often to create light bulbs, to create lamps, is just put light bulbs in them. But for this wall lamp, I intentionally didn't want to do that. I could put a light bulb inside it, but it'll also work pretty well just to make this white surface a lamp. So I'm going to go into it again, so I'm editing it again. I'm going to pick that object, and I'm going to go into iRender Next Object Properties, and just tell it to treat that object as a light. I'm going to make it, since it's outside, I'm going to make it a little smaller than some of the other lights. So I just say treat that object itself as a light. It's just going to make a light that comes out of all the points on that object. That works very well also for quite a few things. Let's exit that. Whoops, something went wrong. Let's load that up and get going again. So something went wrong and I'm having to restart that sample. So I'm going to load that image again, see where we are on it. I don't have the lights in there yet, so I'm going to go into the sconces, put the lights in again. This is a good practice for you to see twice how I do everything. I'm going to edit it, load the lamp wizard, grab a point light, make it 2 inches, place it inside the light, get outside the light, and I'm going to go to the wall lamp, do the same thing again, and I'm editing it. I'm going to right-click on the object, set it as an object property, tell it I want it to be a light, set the intensity of the light, and be done with that. This time I'm going to save it just in case something goes wrong again, and just render that. So you'll see that my light bulb, I didn't get a light bulb in the second lamp. That's because when I went really fast this time, I hadn't gone in and edited the lamp properly. But if I placed the lamp inside the component, then it would be in both components. And you see how this other lamp just makes a lamp and goes on. Now I want to do one more thing to this model. I want to show we have a television set back here on the back. And when we ordinarily render this, the television set isn't lit up. There's a couple of things you could decide to do. You could shine a light on the television set, but that always looks fake. You could make the television set a light, and that works, but then it's illuminating the room, which is often correct, but sometimes you don't want to go to that trouble. You just want to have a sign that looks like it's backlit or a television set. So what you do is you go in here and just edit that material. You go into the Glow tab, and I'm just going to give it a self-glow. I'm going to set it way too high first to 20%. 10 turns out, I practiced with this before we started. 10 turns out to work pretty well. I'm going to give that television set a self-glow, re-render it, and now it's much too bright. Actually, that's not too bad, but I was going to mainly wanted to show you how you can then also use lighting channels. So the self-glow also has its own lighting channels. So if I want to make the television set brighter, I can make it even brighter. Or if I want to make the television set not glow at all, I can do that. So the self-glow is just nice for objects that you want to make a little brighter or a little lighter. We use it for backlit boxes, for television sets. We also use it often for walls. Sometimes people just want the walls to look more like they're more illuminated than they would be in real life, and you can add a little self-glow to a wall or to a ceiling, and again get an effect you might want to have. We're running short of the main point here. I want to go and show you some stuff with trees because we have a nice little tree editor. So this will take just a couple minutes. I'm going to start a new model, and I'm just going to go. This is our tree icon. We've got a really great tree editor that's good for making trees, both for rendering and for making trees that you can just place in SketchUp. Most people, when they start with SketchUp, they like trees. They go out in the 3D warehouse and they find some wonderful trees which have thousands and thousands of leaves and twigs and branches, and just make your SketchUp model really slow down. We've got a little tree generator here that our programmers created, and it just lets you make a tree. And we also have a bunch of predefined trees, but I'm just going to start with nothing. This tree has one trunk. Now I'm going to tell it I want 3 trunks. So now it's got 3 trunks, and they're all going straight up. There's a little bending feature here. If I go to the left, they'll all bend down to the ground, which is very unrealistic. If I go to the right, they'll come out and then bend up a little straighter, which is the effect I want to have here. This tree has the branches starting out about a foot from the ground. I can change that. The height of the trunk, I can just make the trunk taller. And there's a whole lot of settings here. You can pick different leaves. You can put on flowers. You can change the age of the tree, which gives you more. This is a 16-year-old tree. I'm going to make it a 23-year-old tree. It just has more foliage and stuff going with it at that point. So you define the tree, and then you save it. And then we bring up a special little thing to render the tree. What we're going to place in SketchUp is just a picture of the tree. So we're going to right now generate that picture of the tree. And then when we render the tree, we go back to the definition of the tree and re-render the tree from scratch. I'll show you that in a second here, right after we create this tree. Takes a couple of minutes to make each one of these, but it'll be worth it when we're done. So the tree is done. I say save the tree image. I just place it directly in SketchUp. You see it works very quickly in SketchUp because the tree, I want to place these two far enough apart that you're able to see that they're different when we render them. There we go. Because all we're placing in SketchUp is just an image of the tree, but I had some settings. I could have made some very nice images. These are high resolution, which are pretty good images, but you can make some nice images and just use these trees directly in SketchUp. When I render them now, let's just render them with let's turn on the sun. We'll render them with the sun. Start the rendering. You'll see that the two trees both render different. So every occurrence of the tree is made different. You'll see the tree on the left has this lowest branch sticking straight out. The tree on the right has a lower branch sticking up. So basically the trees are just different. But the other nice thing is if you zoom in on the trees, you'll see that they actually have very fine detail. I'm going to zoom in on a section here. When you zoom in SketchUp, you just see the image itself made bigger. And the way I made these images, they would have worked better for foreground trees. If I really want for background trees, if I wanted a tree the size of the foreground, I would have had to make a higher quality image. But what I want to show you is that when this renders, it goes back to the definition of the tree, grabs the images for everything, and makes a very high quality rendering right here. You can see all the individual leaves and the trunks. So you can get some very, very nice trees without putting a lot of geometry in your SketchUp model, and really without slowing down the rendering nearly as much as it would to be grabbing one of these 3D warehouse trees with thousands and thousands of leaves and bringing them in. I'm going to show just a couple of more things here, then we're going to see if there's any questions that we want to answer. Kevin, if you're there, you might tell me whether we should go on a while or if you have any good questions yet. Otherwise, I have a few more things I'd like to show. So.
Hey, Al. Yeah, go on ahead. I think we only had one question so far, but I'm trying to get everybody to post questions if they have them. But yeah, go on ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to just show you some more things while we wait and see some questions, and if some of them come up now, then Kevin might interrupt me and read those questions to me. I mentioned earlier that some things are very easy and some things are very difficult. This particular dialogue here will show you how complex some things can be. You don't need to use all these things, but they're just available. Sometimes you should just look through them and know they're there, and then when your boss comes in or you for some reason want to do something different, you can use all area settings that are available. We've looked at this presets setting before in doing all the presets. The render setting lets you set the size of the rendering. Bigger renderings take more time. I've been rendering everything at 600 pixels today because for our movie. But if you want to make a really great rendering, you're going to make a 3-foot picture out of and do something with, and you can set this up just as high as you want. It'll simply take longer. This is a 600 pixel wide rendering. If I made a 3,000 pixel wide rendering, which is 5 times bigger, it's going to take 25 times longer to render. But sometimes you just start it at night or start it over the weekend and let it go on and do that. I want to show you a couple of things. One is our background wizard. Let me load another model to work with on this. That isn't how I want to load that model. Let's try that again. Background. Oh well, let's open the background model. This is a model that has windows in it, and we want to be able to see through those windows. And we're going to load a background and put it in this model. Let me show you the background. It's just an image I grabbed off the web, and the background is already in perspective. Now, if the perspective of our model matched the perspective of this background immediately, it'd be great. For those of you who are good Photoshop users, you could also go into Photoshop and adjust the image so it matched the perspective of the model. But using our background wizard, I'm going to go in here and load that model, tell it to use it as a background. You can load virtually anything to use as a background, and one of these things should say background. One of these things, there it is. I'm going to load that picture and use it as a background. And then we have a thing called a layer wizard, which lets you position the background with regard to the model itself and also distort the background. Going to make this a little bigger so we can see it better. So right now it's showing our SketchUp model. It's showing what we would see, and you can see that I would expect that when I looked out the windows, and especially for purposes of this, I want a row of windows in the background to pretty much match a row of windows. A row of windows in the model. So what I'm going to do is go down here and tell it that I want to be able to fully distort the background. I'm going to drag the lower part of the background down until those windows match right there, and I've got a set of windows matching. So I'm able to drag I'm able to distort it as much as I want until I get just what I want, and then I'm able to just move the background around. So maybe I want to see a fire escape over here on the left in some of those windows. Now the windows aren't aligning right, so I can just really quickly stretch it a little more, get those windows to be the way I want. Then render the model, and if I haven't made any mistakes, we'll see the rendered model with the background showing through behind it. And I didn't do it here. What I would have intended to do with this would have been part of a building, and you wouldn't actually see the background except through the window. But by letting you see both the background here and the windows, that'll work pretty well, so you can see how that works. Then I'm going to go on. We have a foreground thing on this same dialog. I'm going to load a special model I made for the foreground. Foreground, you can either put things that you just want to be in the foreground, or very often you just use it for a watermark for your company logo. That's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to go to the foreground. I'm going to go to the Setup dialog, go to the Foreground tab. I'm going to browse for a foreground image. I just happen to have an image here of nothing ever wants to. Hey, let's go to the C drive, favorites, uploads, up one. If I have an image here of my logo, I'm going to pick that in there. I'm going to tell it to put it in the lower right. We'll play in a minute with the wizard to do something, but you can say how much of the logo you want to appear. So you can either see the logo solidly, or you can have the logo, I'm going to set about 50-50, so I'll be able to see the logo and see through it. And then when I render, it just places that foreground image in front of every rendering. Many people just like to do that to make sure that every rendering comes out. This would be a good chance to use that same layer wizard to adjust that a bit. So I'm going to make the, anyway, you can see how that was there. I need to play a little more with it and play with some settings to get it just the way I want. There's some settings on there on the foreground, for instance, to tell it to use multiply mode. I think multiply mode is a photo thing that says it just increases the background. I'm not going to play too much with this because we're kind of running short on time, but you can, I'll do that, and I'll say, I'll make it more itself and make it smaller. It looks too big, so I'm going to make it smaller and then re-render, and I get a smaller little image down there. But that's just handy if you want to automatically apply a foreground image to everything you do. So, do we have some questions, Kevin?
We most certainly do. Let's see. I forwarded some, just one of them, but I think I can ask them on air if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the question, I have one question from William, and he's asking if are materials applied in SketchUp or iRender?
You can. I've been bouncing back and forth on both of those, and you didn't see that. You can apply the materials in SketchUp, or you can apply the materials in iRender. For materials, it's best to apply them in SketchUp. But everything I've been doing, sometimes I've been making the changes in the rendering window. Sometimes I've been making the changes in the SketchUp window. But you can, even when you make the changes in the rendering window, you can then bring those back into your iRender drawing. But the materials in the SketchUp drawing, the materials placed on SketchUp are easier to see right away because you can see the materials right there in SketchUp.
Awesome. Okay. And here's another one from Jeff Mason. He wants to know, how do you balance light in a room that has no interior lighting? Just strong sun light coming through windows?
Yeah. When we used the lighting channels earlier to balance light, we could have turned off all the interior lights. I'm not going to go back there and do that. And then the only two things you can really balance are the sun and the sky, although in fairness, I forgot to mention the brightness setting up here. I've got another little model I'm going to bring up here just to show, well, you can use the brightness just to bring down the overall intensity. So if I wanted this room to look dark, I can just lower the brightness and make it dark. I've got another little model here that I started rendering from, maybe. No, I guess not. Okay, so that's the answer to that question. You could do the balancing. Well, here's one we were working on earlier. Now let me see if I can. I don't think I had any sun on at the time though, so I can't do that. Never mind. That's the answer. Yes, you can balance the sun in the sky, and you can use the brightness to bring down the overall intensity to get whatever you want to do.
All right.
Along with that, we have a full set of Photoshop filters that you can apply. I'm going to go on here in another second, Kevin. We have a full set of Photoshop filters you can apply. A lot of people just take stuff over to Photoshop and they're good at it, but if all you wanted to do was change the contrast, you can just go right in here. I'm going to turn the contrast all the way down, which is kind of a dumb idea. I can turn the contrast down a lot, or I can turn the contrast up a lot. And what's nice about making the settings here is it remembers those settings, and the next time you render the same model, it puts the same settings in again. Or if you were changing the contrast in Photoshop, you'd have to go in there each time and do it over again when you re-rendered. Go ahead, Kevin.
Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you send up specific questions that are very specific. So here's one from Wesley Frost. He wants to know, can you use your own picture as a background?
Yes, I chose a background image. When I did that background, I just chose a picture that was there. Now, the HDRI skies are different. In order to get the full illumination and stuff, you'd have to turn your picture into an HDRI sky, and that can also be done. There are some tools that we have and some tools other people have to do that, but if you just want to put a background image in, you can put any image you want in the background. I'm trying to give slightly longer answers. You go to the background dialog, you click browse, and you browse for just virtually any image. There's some horrible images in this particular place, but whatever images you have, you can just use those as background images. Next.
Okay, this is from DJ. I have used a couple of other rendering packages and remember assigning a surface texture, or rather a bumpiness or smoothness to objects. Is that an option here?
Yes, we have. I didn't have time to show everything. We have a thing called auto bump, which just takes whatever textures are available in the SketchUp model and makes them bumps. And we also have real true bump mapping, where you use one image for the coloration of a material and a second image to define how the bump maps. For those of you who don't know, bump maps are a thing you put in an image to make it look like you actually added that geometry to the model. So a bump map would say this part of the image sticks out, this part of the material goes in, and they're very effective for things. So we have full support for bump maps, and also there's a whole set of things called arrowway textures, which actually give you 4 images for each material. One the color, one the bump map, one tells how reflective it is, and so you can use things like that to get some very high quality materials. We really didn't spend any time on high quality materials here today. Go ahead, Kevin.
All right, and we have a whole bunch of questions. Let's see. Are there any preset trees set to directly import rather than making it? And this is from Manish.
Read that. You stopped in the middle of your question. Read that again.
Let's see. Are there any preset trees set to directly import rather than making it?
Yeah, when I went to the tree thing there, I made a tree, but there's one called Load from Library, and there's a library of trees. So here's a bunch of trees. You can start with any one of these trees, and then after you load it, it brings up the same editor, and you can then make slight changes to it. But we've gone to the trouble to make a whole bunch of pre-named trees, probably 40 or 50 of these. Go ahead.
Let's see. All right. What are fog, haze, and special? And this is a question from John Cates.
So read it again.
What are fog, haze, and special?
Fog. Oh, on the other thing, fog. I wanted to show you that there's a fog thing here that lets you set up fog. Fog is actually fairly difficult to set up, and when you're ready to do it, you'll want to put some stuff on our forum and ask some questions. There's an easy fog, which just matches the SketchUp fog, which makes things in the background dimmer. But the real fog, called volumetric fog, acts like the fog is really there. So this is a model we created using volumetric fog. That's what that fog setting is for. And what you can see here is that you can see the fog is heavier near the lights because the light beam's bouncing off the fog. That's the way fog really works. So you can create some quite impressive pictures like this by using fog. I mentioned it's difficult because you don't just turn fog on and go. You got to tell it the dispersion of the fog, the depth of the fog, the area you want to apply the fog to. So it's best when you get ready to do that if you try it, send us a model, and we'll help you get it set up. And we just didn't have time to go through all the other settings on here. Special has a number of settings like edge lines. I really wanted to show you a model with some edge lines in it. And what was the other one he asked about? More. So there's just tons and tons of settings here that it takes a while to learn. Image lets you go in, and one of the things with some people will start a rendering at night and then they'll come in the morning. They want to let it render all night, and they'll discover that Microsoft has rebooted their machine for them, which they do for me every Tuesday or Thursday. So there's an auto image here that just says when you're done, save the image. There's also an auto save, which you can say save the image every 10 passes. So if your machine isn't there with you when you come in the morning, at least you can get the last image you saved. Go ahead, Kevin.
All right. I think that's about it for webinar. And let me switch back to the presenter. I think there's a lot of questions. What I'm going to do is I will send you guys a list at Render Plus see if you guys can answer it in detail for these guys over here, because it looks like they're really, really interested in this product of yours. Let's see. I'll switch presenter to me now. All right. Cool. All right. So got to read the script. All right. Thank you, Al Hart, for the presentation, on Rich Hart for helping us out as a panelist. On behalf of Novedge, we want to thank you guys for teaming up with us for this webinar. For those in our audience who are curious to learn more about iRender NXT for SketchUp, feel free to head on over to iRender Plus. iRender Plus Systems' own webpage at renderplus.com. Don't be afraid to check out their help desk for the latest product information and tutorials. In addition, to nab yourself a copy of the iRender NXT plugin, visit our website at novedge.com. As the leading online design software superstore, we have some of the best prices around with a staff you can call or chat with anytime. Now, if you want to try iRender NXT plugin for free, our staff at Novedge will be happy to get that started for you. So just contact Bob there at bob@novedge.com. And before I forget, here at Novedge, we have created several communities to foster collaboration and communication between design professionals. At vectorworking.com, you have access to all the latest industry news and videos. Furthermore, we encourage community members to help each other excel in their careers through discussion and submitted content. It is free and easy to sign up. On top of that, a short weekly newsletter with the latest buzz are yours to enjoy. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please do not hesitate to email me at kevin@novedge.com. In our next upcoming webinar, episode 55, Autodestus, technical consultant Matthew Howinski will show you a refreshingly different approach to tackling your 3D modeling, rendering, and animation tasks. Be prepared for a comprehensive overview of the most significant new features of Form Z7. Registration is free, but space is limited, so for more information on how to sign up, check it out at novedge.com/webinar/55. And if you want to rewatch this awesome webinar, episode 54 with Al Hart, and all our other previous webinars, this and past webinars can be found on our Novedge Webinar Series channel through Vimeo and YouTube. So stay tuned. On behalf of our team at Novedge, Al, Rich, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right, and thank you guys for watching. Yeah, for sure. All right.
And thanks to Novedge for setting this up.
No worries.